Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Two Tuesdays ago, I arrived in Israel for the first time since 2021. And we got off the plane and we went straight to Hostage Square. Like I said, I hadn't been to Israel since October 7th, so the square just existed as a picture on social media. A place that it's right across from the Kiryat, which is like the IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv, where families made sure that the names of all of those who were missing weren't forgotten, where Israelis showed support to one another, where they protested their anger and fear, where they refused to give up. And I arrived at Hostage Square in this really weird liminal moment of time. The square still exists. Everything is there. But the community is uncertain about what to do moving forward now that these hostages, thank God, are home. This square holds remnants of what it was. There's a long tunnel replica covered in a bunch of notes and stickers. There's a baby grand piano that Alon Ohel played when he came back, and there's a sign on top that says, "You are not alone." And there's like a roped off section of all of these yellow chairs that used to sit around tables. Some of them were stacked, some of them were knocked over, some of them were roped off. And in that chaos, I saw a microcosm of the post-war Israel, if you want to call it post-war, that I would spend a week witnessing. Between each knocked over chair and also the shut off big countdown TV, a question hung in the air for me. What do we do now that all of the hostages have returned, but many Israelis feel that their trust in institutions has been shaken? Is the war over? Do we go back to the democracy protests that happened actually right across on the other side of the Kiryat before October 7th? Our trauma hasn't disappeared because the hostages have returned, but no one is leading a large mass movement forward. There's no large movement to figure out how we recover. For some, there's relief and feel that maybe there's nothing left to do. But honestly, that wasn't the pervasive voice that I heard in Israel. The voice I heard was that there's so much work to do. No one I met doubted that Israel still faces real and immediate threats. The question wasn't whether security matters. It was how a traumatized society rebuilds while remaining vigilant. Israeli philosopher Micha Goodman suggests that since 1948, there have been 4 generations of Israelis. But this generation, the post-war, post-October 7th generation, it's as if they're first-generation Israelis all over again. That's because the state needs new pioneers, new people, just like we had in 1948 who came from all over, to figure out how to move forward from the trauma of October 7th. New visions, new social movements, and new leaders. And moments of beginning are exactly where our Torah portion has a lot to say. In Mishpatim, we find ourselves in the middle of a dense legal code, laws about servants and damages, about oxen and property. And then, pretty unexpectedly, the Torah pauses to tell us, keep far from a false matter. Midrachak midvar sheker. Distance yourself from falsehood. This isn't just a prohibition against lying. The Torah commands us to distance ourselves from falsehood, which Rashi explains demands technical honesty. We're required to create distance between ourselves and anything that resembles falsehood. Truth is not passive. It asks something active of us, especially in moments of uncertainty. When the stories that we used to rely on no longer make complete sense, pursuing truth means having the courage to see reality as it is, not as we wish it were, and asking, what do we do from here? For my next week in Israel, I saw people wrestling with that exact question. I met pioneers, individuals inside very different communities who are trying to live out this command to pursue truth, even when it demands literally everything of them. I'm going to share 3 of these stories with you. The people I'm about to describe, they don't represent a single political ideology. If I put them all in a room, they would surely disagree about almost everything. What unites them is not their conclusions, but their willingness to confront uncomfortable truths within their own community. The first story I'll share is of a rabbi named Rabbi Menachem Baumbach. He is the creator of the Netzach school system throughout Israel. He grew up in Mea Shearim, Haredi, no secular education. He only learned in Cheder. He learned Talmud and Aramaic, and he only spoke Yiddish. He tried to go to Hebrew University after learning for 3 months of English, and he failed pretty quickly. But after a lot more learning, he started to look at his community and saw a truth that many Haredim prefer to ignore. The Haredi population is the fastest growing segment of Israeli society. Yet a majority lack tools to fully participate in Israeli civic and economic life. So he created something new. He has a school system of over 20 schools in Israel. Students, mostly boys, but there are some nursing schools for young women, spend 6 hours a day learning Talmud and 6 hours studying English, math, science, and computers. Can you imagine a 9th grader spending 12 hours a day in school every day? Half of his graduates serve in the army. Rav Baumbach teaches them that serving in the army is the greatest mitzvah one can do, and that serving doesn't mean abandoning their Haredi values. For some students in their Haredi communities, attending Netzach is so controversial within their families that Rav Baumbach decided to offer an online school. So 6,000 Haredi students now learn in internet cafes, hidden in the alleys of Mea Shearim and Bnei Barak. He deeply knows the risks. I met his son, who no longer considers himself Haredi. His son, who went to the army, no longer keeps Shabbat, no longer wears a kippah. And somebody asked him, who funds your schools? He said, mostly liberal American Jews. Here is someone who looked at the painful truth, the growing divide within Israeli society, and he refused to accept the false binary that you have to choose between being Haredi and serving Israel. So he pioneered a third way, one that honors both tradition and responsibility to the entire Israeli society. He's keeping far from falsehood that these worlds cannot coexist. Rav Baumbach is working to heal divisions within Jewish society, within Israeli society. I met a few extraordinary people who are working on confronting divisions between Israelis and Palestinians. I met this woman named Petach Jones Pelach. She's an Australian Orthodox woman who made Aliyah. She teaches Torah. She studied under Nechama Leibovitz, who we often quote from this bima, and she volunteers for an organization called Women Wage Peace. She said, to support Israel on the ground is to criticize the Israeli government. We cannot follow the masses. We, as Jews, are held to a higher standard. If we don't feel the pain of everyone in our country, we aren't doing it right. Others in Israel disagree strongly with her approach, arguing that security realities limit what peace movements can really accomplish. But she says that debate is woven in Israel's democratic fabric itself. Women wage peace is built on the belief that women often approach negotiation differently. If you saw the show Suffs a few weeks ago, she really reminded me of these women who are suffragists. Because women approach negotiation differently means that they approach with greater readiness to listen and to compromise. They come to the table not with the end goal in mind, but with the actual desire to communicate. When I asked her whether she goes home on Shabbat and shares her work in her Orthodox community, she said, usually not, but sometimes when I'm lucky, I can. Peta is pursuing a truth that's deeply uncomfortable, that loving Israel means being willing to see its flaws, to hold it accountable, and to ask more. She refuses the false choice between unconditional support and abandonment. She's distancing herself from the lie that critique equals betrayal. Finally, I met a woman named Rebecca Bardak. She's Rachel Goldberg Poland's first cousin. She made Aliyah from Berkeley, California when she was in college, and she's raised 3 children in the school system Yad Layad, hand in hand. They're bilingual Arabic and Hebrew schools that bring Jewish and Arab students and families together. Their mission is to change the reality that in Israel, Jews and Arabs live in separation, in fear, and violence. Rebecca described her first back-to-school night almost 2 decades ago. She said that there was a room of kindergarten parents sitting in the tiny chairs, and 2 teachers sat before them. One teacher spoke in Hebrew, and one teacher spoke in Arabic. The parents had no idea how to speak to each other. She thought to herself, this is taking too much time. There must be another way. But over 20 years, she says, I don't think there's another way. This uncomfortable, imperfect way has propelled them forward. I asked her if any of her students' friends ever joined the Bnei Mitzvah, the Arab friends. She says, sometimes. But then came the ultimate test. Schools closed after October 7th, and a few days afterwards, when Hirsch Goldberg Poland was missing, it was time for her youngest daughter to return to school. The school reached out, knowing that this young girl's cousin was missing, and asked if her daughter wanted to see a therapist. But there was a caveat. The therapist was Palestinian. Rebecca faced an excruciating question. Will this therapist honor my daughter's very real trauma and fears? Should I send her to somebody outside the school? In that moment, Rebecca could have retreated into the safety of separation. She could have accepted the false comfort that only someone from her community could understand her daughter's pain. Instead, she made a different choice. She sent her daughter to this therapist as an expression of her family's deepest values, true coexistence. Her decision didn't erase her fear or her anger. It existed along them. She anxiously awaited, as you might imagine, her daughter's return from school all day that day. But before she returned, she received an email from the therapist. It said, "Dear Rebecca, what a tragedy your daughter has been through. It's my #1 priority to be there for her and for your family as time goes on. Please be in touch with anything you need. Immediately, Rebecca's faith was restored. Yes, a terrible thing had happened between the two communities. But at that moment, her daughter's humanity was still front and center, no matter who the therapist was. Rebecca is pursuing perhaps the hardest truth of all, that our humanity and the humanity of others persists even in our darkest moments. That seeing the full humanity of the other does not diminish our own pain. That holding both truths simultaneously is not betrayal, but courage. I think we all, in our own ways, are standing in this post-war hostage square, surrounded by remnants of what was, uncertain about what comes next. In our brains, in our minds, and also in the pit of our guts are the knocked over chairs, the shut off countdown, the question, what now? Micha Goodman says that this generation needs to become the first generation of Israelis, again, pioneers who build something from the ground up. And I saw those pioneers. But I think that the Torah is telling us something deeper and something even more specific. We need to become pioneers of truth. We need people like Rav Bambach who look at growing divides and refuse to accept that they're inevitable. And by the way, Rav Bambach is the first male Orthodox person in my entire time in Israel who did not flinch when I looked at him and said, I'm a rabbi. I'm serious. We need people like Peta who understand that love and critique can coexist. We need people like Rebecca who choose humanity over fear, even and especially in moments of trauma. The good news is that these pioneers exist. My tour guide called them the big fat middle of Israel. They're doing this work right now, often without recognition, often at great personal cost. They are the ones rebuilding not just institutions, but the very foundation of what it means to live integrity in a broken world. And they sort of gave me some hope. The fact that Rav Bambach's schools are funded by us, liberal American Jews. The fact that Peta finds moments where her Orthodox community can hear her. This therapist, this Palestinian therapist, who chose compassion over division. The work of pursuing truth, of keeping far from falsehood, it's not solitary. It requires community. It requires people willing to sit down, to support those who see clearly, even when what they see is uncomfortable. Even when what they see makes sense in our brain, but in the gut of our stomach feels deeply uncomfortable. It requires us to be willing to fund this work, to create space for difficult conversations, to believe in the possibility of something new. So I'm feeling hopeful, not because these problems are solved, but because they are far from solved. Not because the trauma was healed, it is not, but because I saw people who refuse to accept that the status quo is inevitable. I saw people pioneering new ways forward, grounded not in ideology or fantasy, but in the hard work of seeing what is true and building from there. The final anecdote I will share is from previous UK Ambassador Daniel Taub, who said, "I'm very optimistic about the day after tomorrow. The younger generation will be these pioneers. We just have to wait for their day." The pioneers I met are planting seeds. They probably won't see the full harvest in their lifetime, but they're modeling what it means to pursue truth when the path is extraordinarily unclear. As we read these words, midrachak midvar sheker, we're asked to examine the falsehoods we cling to and to support those doing the work of truth-telling. I think of this yellow sign that was on top of Alon Ohel's piano. You're not alone. In this work of rebuilding and questioning, we're not alone. We can take those knockdown chairs, and something new and true can emerge. These people echo the words of the Torah, that the command is not just about honesty, that it is a refusal to accept the status quo as inevitable. It's a call to examine our most basic assumptions, to ask what is true and what is not, to notice where we may be living too comfortably inside falsehood. Each of them shows us a different path. Where do we need to build new ways of learning and growing? Where do we need the courage to challenge even those we generally agree with when something feels incomplete? And where do we need to reach across the line of difference toward people we may need, in some ways to become more like them? This is the work the Torah has asked of us Jews for generations, to look honestly at our world and at ourselves, to keep moving closer to what is true. And if we can do that, patiently, courageously, but most importantly, together, then from this moment of uncertainty, we can begin to build something wiser and stronger and more humane. Shabbat Shalom.